CNN has breaking news right now. It just went up on the screen. President Zelensky of Ukraine has been informed that February 16th will be the day of the attack. Now,
Wednesday.
That is CNN reporting right now. We have to attribute it to them. I have nothing to go on other than what their forward correspondents are putting up on the screen. We are being told that an invasion of Ukraine will happen this Wednesday, that the Russians are going in. That's where we are.
So this is fascinating. I'm going to let you do your read, and then this is going to be a heck of a tease. But I want to ask you, based on your knowledge in foreign affairs over the years, that leak is clearly coming from American intelligence, right? I mean, if CNN is reporting it based on their connections to the Biden administration, what is the value, right? I mean, I think that's a pretty easy way to source it, right? I think it would be unlikely that it would be coming in any other direction. Can you ever remember any situation like this where the actual date of an attack has been forecast 48 hours in advance?
I mean, there was the Bush administration, Saddam, hand him over or else deadline, right?
So a deadline is one thing,
right.
But to say somebody else is going to undertake an action in 2 days, I'll let you think about it during the break also as you do this read. But I just, in my experience in reading and studying news, I can't remember a situation like this.
We have to drill down into this because, the headline right now is the Ukrainian President Zelensky informed that attack will happen Wednesday. Okay. Informed by whom exactly? And with what level
United
of confidence,
States,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
this is where we need to actually, and by the way, if that is true, Clay, maybe then the attack happens tomorrow, right? I mean, this is the realities of the situation.
That's why I'm so fascinated.
Let's come back. We'll look more at this Ukraine breaking news.
There is now more concrete data, at least, or a concrete report in terms of an official timeline that Russia might be invading Ukraine on Wednesday. And it sounds so crazy to say, and that's the report, by the way, of CNN, that Ukraine's president has been told that. This is wild, Buck, because I can't remember any other invasion of a country that's been forecast a couple of days out. Like, hey, by the way, we're going to invade you in 2 days.
I mean, also, though, I just so everyone is clear, I read that off the CNN screen, the exact headline. You'd think that now it's flight attendant hit man with coffee pot after he tried to get into Now, I know the news cycle, you change things up a lot. But if they really think they've got a clear
European invasion in 2 days.
European invasion timeline, you would think so. So maybe, that's why I said look, first of all, I know people are saying right now, yeah, Buck, it's CNN. And I know. Yeah. But on things like this, remember, even propaganda outlets, Pravda tried to get the weather right. I mean, there are some things that you don't want to get wrong no matter what your politics are. And something like the schedule of an invasion would be one of them, right? That no matter how partisan you are, you have to get certain facts right. But yeah, Clay, we're being told it could happen Wednesday. It could happen before then. Obviously, once you announce a timeline too,
that's what I'm saying. Like,
you may
Hitler wasn't. I know we had a different communication universe when the Blitzkrieg was happening, but it's not like in Poland they were like, "Hey, Hitler's letting you know 2 days from now he's rolling across the border," right? So I just can't even hardly think of a precedent for when there has been an acknowledgement and discussion about like this. It's not a family vacation. Like, hey, in a couple of days we're taking this flight over.
When you think you have overwhelming military and particularly air superiority, I mean, that's what made me think of Persian Gulf War II with George W. Bush, where he said, what was it, 48 hours to have Saddam capitulate or else. I mean, that was because wherever they moved their surface-to-air missiles and wherever they moved the Republican Guard, it wasn't really going to matter. And at some level, here's what will happen. I mean, the basic military analysis you could do for a Russian invasion of Ukraine is that if you do what they call order of battle, I mean, if you lined up tanks versus tanks, planes versus planes, the Russians are going to smash Ukraine pretty quickly in terms of seizing. They'll be able to seize major capital, there's major cities, probably seize the capital, seize important sites of strategic importance, power, electricity, things like that, water. They'll be able to do airports. They'll be able to do that. Then the question turns into, well, what do they do once they've done that? Because the hard part is often then in the insurgency phase. If the Ukrainian people, and we've been told, we had Nolan Peterson on from Ukraine. We may be having him join us again later this week if he can get to a place where he can, talk to us. Depends on what the security situation is. I mean, Clay, the belief among many is that the Ukrainians will fight. If the Russians think they're going to be able to patrol the streets of a restive Kiev, and they're not going to have big problems on their hands, that's delusional. No matter how much better their military is pound for pound. You know what I mean? The insurgency is different from our planes can shoot your planes out of the sky.
Do the Russians believe that the Ukrainians are not going to fight? And is that why they're letting it be known? Because you know how this stuff happens, Buck. If you're just like a Ukrainian guy and you're sitting there near the border and suddenly Russia invades and you don't expect it, you might fight, right? As opposed to running because you're in danger. But if the Russians are like, hey, we have pretty good intel that many of these Ukrainian forces are not going to actually fight, let's let them know we're coming so that they have time to abandon their post and or they're not overwhelmed or surprised suddenly when this occurs. I'm just trying to think through the Russian plan. If they want it known that they are coming on a specific date, is that because they expect some form of capitulation automatically, right, and not the rabid defense that the Ukrainians are trying to argue they will face?
And often, it'll rely so much. I think will turn so much on what the stated aims of any military invasion by the Russians would be. Let's say the Russians go in, they say we're going in, and they topple the government. If they make it quick and they make it seem like they're only going after certain targets, government targets they want, and then they say we want a friendly pro-Russian, person that'll promise not to be in NATO, maybe then they're in a situation that, look, we're gonna leave as long as we've got a Russian puppet here. Maybe you don't have, again, it's so tough to really see how this goes, or rather to guess where this is going to go, because one, may not even happen. Two, what's the scale of what they go in with? How successful are they, Clay? And then beyond that, what are the Russians trying to accomplish, right? So we have multiple steps. If we were doing a decision tree here, it would be kind of a mess. So tough to say, tough to know. Let's just hope that cooler heads prevail and everyone can go back to, arguing over other things. And not. Are the
Russians going to cross the border? Are they vaccinated? Do we know?
I mean, at least then, if they're not vaccinated,
my understanding is
we know the libs will be upset.
Yeah, maybe they won't be allowed in if they're not vaccinated. News breaking about a potential invasion of Ukraine that could occur on Wednesday. And in fact, President Zelensky says Ukraine, quote, has been informed Wednesday, February 16, quote, will be the day of the attack. According to comments attributed to Zelensky, accompanying a Facebook update to the nation, he does not say who or what agency provided that information. That tweet has since been deleted, Buck, that I am reading from right now. So this whole thing is super weird. Now, CNN reported basically the same thing, and I am reading that from CNN anchor and chief national security correspondent Jim Scuddo.
He went to my high school as well. Him and Fauci. Fauci's worse than him.
Yeah, so he deleted that tweet that I just read you. Literally, that tweet went up like 5 minutes ago. He did say this, which is up from 11 minutes ago. The U.S. is closing its embassy in Kiev and temporarily relocating the small number of remaining diplomatic personnel to a city in the west of the country, quote, due to the dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces, Secretary of State Blinken announced. And I'm hitting refresh on his Twitter feed, and yeah, he's pulled that down that I read to you directly off of Facebook. So it was there, it was not, which I think, Buck, just kind of emphasizes the strangeness of this story in general, right?
Well, this is why when I pointed out,
yes,
they basically have, hey, flashing on the screen. And by the way, at Fox News right now, Fox News alert, the Ukrainian president informed Russia will attack Wednesday. CNN had that up first. And then after a commercial break, came back into the angry guy on plane throwing coffee pot or whatever that story was. Right. Usually, if you had breaking news about an imminent invasion and had a source that you could go to in some credibility and detail, you would explain to the audience what's going on, because this is, by the way, this is going to have so many implications, even apart from our primary consideration, which is, make sure that U.S. forces don't get embroiled in this. This doesn't become a broader conflagration in the region, et cetera. But it's going to affect the markets massively. It's going to affect, obviously, for anybody who's got family in Ukraine, affect their safety massively. There's a lot of things that all come together here. So when you're talking about breaking news, imminent war is about as big a story as you're going to get. And for them to switch so quickly was an indicator of something. There's a lot of noise out there. Can I also just point out that the Russians love to do this kind of thing? They excel in something called maskirovka, which is warfare by deception. And this is what they've done in dealing with Crimea, in the Donbass region, in Georgia in the past. Obviously the country, not the state. So these are some of the things that have gone on. And they may be, Clay, to your point about who announces an invasion, this could be disinformatia. Remember we talked about Russian disinformation all the time? This could be actual disinformation put out there to get Zelensky to react in a certain way. We just don't know, man. I mean, we're looking at, we're 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. We're relying on a reporting cadre that has limitations in their sources. You got Russians putting out lies, nonsense, and garbage on purpose, the Russian state, left and right. But I got to tell you, from what it's looking like right now, I would be surprised if we did not have bombs falling this week, based on what we're seeing.
I just can't get over the modern era. Like, the president goes on Facebook and says we may get invaded. I mean, I understand that we live in an era where things are quite a bit different, but the idea that you could be scrolling through Facebook and it's like, oh, look, Simone got a new puppy. And oh, so-and-so's mad because their boss made them wear a mask. And then, like, the president of Ukraine's like, hey, we may get invaded. It's just, it's so strange that you would go on Facebook and say, hey, I'm told that the country may get invaded on Wednesday. Like, that seems like, it seems like maybe that would be a national address moment as opposed to, dropping it in a Facebook message.
They have been certainly preparing for this for weeks, and I don't see, Clay, I'm trying to see this thing through and get a sense of what this looks like if it does happen. I feel like people would have been saying limited incursion, meaning what they've done in Donbass, essentially create some noise somewhere inside of Ukraine, say, oh, we have Russian interests there. You land some paratroopers or whatever, you roll in some tanks, you say, we're taking this area, and we're going to operate this as some kind of a protectorate, which is similar to what they've done in Donbass in the east. They had the referendum in Crimea, which was obviously not a military invasion, but it was essentially coup by vote, and because they said it was rigged and the whole thing was done so that the Russians would get their way. Now, what does this really look like? I mean, to take over, to punch the Ukrainian armed forces badly is something the Russians can clearly do. To hit them hard, they can clearly do that and overrun them pretty quickly. But to control Ukraine afterwards, especially with NATO right next door, I mean, there's a part of me that feels like maybe this still just doesn't actually, this is all just the biggest move of brinksmanship we've ever seen from the Russians in the modern era, the post-Soviet era. Because, Clay, think about what this looks like. I mean, look at the challenges that a coalition, the U.S. coalition in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly in the context of Afghanistan, that was a NATO mission. People forget that. I mean, I was there. I remember it was all these NATO countries. You got Polish guys, British guys, Italians walking around. That was a NATO mission, and against a smaller population and a much less technologically and militarily sophisticated population than what you're dealing with in Ukraine. However, a portion of them wanted to fight in Afghanistan, obviously. They had the Pakistani sanctuary where they could operate, retrain, equip, all the rest of it in essential safety. But the Ukrainians will be getting arms and munitions and assistance, I'm sure, from NATO if this thing turns into a hot war. I mean, Clay, it's kind of hard to fathom that Vladimir Putin thinks that if he full-scale invades Ukraine, this doesn't turn into a nightmare and a bloodbath. That's why it's something smaller and more targeted feels like it has to be possible, or just the whole walkback. You guys promise me, I get assurances you're not going to join NATO ever, Ukraine. And if you do, I'm coming in with everything I've got. That's what it feels like has to be possible. I haven't heard anyone make a compelling case for how Putin can take Ukraine and just subsume it into Russia without massive challenges, casualties, and becoming a pariah state. I just haven't seen it.
And to contextualize, we're talking about a country of 40 million people. So this is California. This is Canada, right?
And a big landmass, too, which also matters. It's a big, big country.
In terms of the number of people that we're talking about, it's not an insubstantial number. And again, in the context of America, it's the size of California in terms of population. It's Canada's population.
And it's just so everyone understands, I just did a quick search on this one. Germany is 137,000 square kilometers. Well, of course, they're giving you 1 in kilometer. Oh, no, sorry, square miles. Yeah, 137,000 square miles. Ukraine is 233,000 square. So this country is substantially larger than Germany in landmass, 40 million people. And because, Clay, what happened in the past, where Crimea got taken and Donbass, and the Ukrainians just didn't have anything really to throw at it, they really didn't have a military that was organized, their military now is actually much better than it was.
Yeah, and that's why, to me, it just seems so weird. And again, if you're just now getting in your car, you're just now having time going out for lunch, wherever you may be, the idea that you would announce when you're going to invade, the idea that Ukraine's president would just Facebook message about a potential invasion that's going on, none of it really seems to add up. Again, unless Russia is thinking there's a massive number of Ukrainian soldiers that are just going to put down their weapons the minute that we invade. We know that they're going to allow us to come right in, and there's not going to be any actual resistance. It's the exact opposite of a blitzkrieg. And to your point, they know that they can be successful, but I can't think of a time where one country has invaded another and let them know they were coming. Now, to your point on Iraq, if they were making a demand and they were saying publicly, hey, Ukraine, unless you do X or Y.
Right. Zelensky resign and someone else step in, something like that.
Then you would at least say, okay, well, they're letting it be known what their plan is, as the United States did with Iraq during the Second Gulf War. But this just all feels really messy to me, that we're basically on a countdown clock. They could put it in the corner of the screen and they're like, hey, the invasion's going to start in 36 hours. I mean, it's weird.
Just remember also that the Russians, and in this case the Soviets, but same basic idea, the Soviet casualties in Afghanistan were substantial. They had 15,000 killed in the Soviet-Afghan war, 35,000 or so wounded, and that was trying to take Afghanistan, right? I think, well, there's easier and harder ways to look at these situations, but you think the Russian state really wants to tackle that right now? They're saying right now on Fox, Clay, 100,000 plus Russian troops. About 130,000 is the number that you see. And then they've got 35,000 plus rebel troops. Also, this is on Fox's screen right now as we're talking to you. The Ukrainian military, if you're up at six-figure strength, which I believe they are, that's all you need are rifles, RPGs, anti-tank, and you can make an occupying military absolutely miserable and cause serious casualties on a regular basis. So, I don't know, man. I hope this turns into a thing that we're all feeling silly that we ever had to talk about, Clay. But I think if you were placing odds right now, you'd have to say the odds are on some kind of Russian action this week.
Oh, the other thing, by the way, during the Olympics, which we can talk about when we come back, which some of you may be saying, well, that's crazy, but there typically has been a, hey, don't invade another country while the Olympics is going on, presumption, right? Especially because we've been talking about the relationship between China and Russia. So is China just saying, hey, Russia, go ahead, because we want to see what the United States response is going to be here, given we've always claimed that Taiwan is a part of our country too? I mean, that's a larger conversation we should probably have as well. First of all, I want to ask you two questions because you've had a lot of experience in international politics and international affairs of this nature. One, what would Putin get by going basically all the way to the edge of invading Ukraine and not do it? In other words, what could his motive be to make us all think that he's going to do that and then not do it? That's one. Two, how much do you think the failure of Americans' withdrawal from Afghanistan has enabled and emboldened many of our adversaries around the world because it sent the message of American militaristic incompetence? Is that part of the fact analysis here if you are Russia, and certainly if you're China as well?
Yeah, let me take these in reverse order. And it's just, I mean, this is remarkable because, Clay, you know, when you talk about law school, for example, in CIA training, there's some of the training we do that involves, you know, stuff that you have to know for the field and, you know, driving cars, shooting guns, all that stuff. And then there's the analytic training. And one of the things you go through is looking at a situation just like this. Is this a war? Is this a feint? Is this an incursion? You go, so this is obviously not a drill. This is real, but it does bring back a lot of the analytic tradecraft that would have been applied in those situations. They try to, you know, get people to be able to at least anticipate most of the enemy's possible movements here. On the second point first, look, all you have to do is look at a timeline of when do the Russians get really aggressive. And I know it's counterintuitive because we had Russia talk for, you know, Trump was a Putin puppet and all this, all lies. That was all nonsense, as we know.
And Russia took no aggressive actions, by and large, while Trump was in office.
We had U.S. forces blow up 200 Russian paramilitaries in the desert in Syria for threatening our Kurdish allies. And we also sent Javelin anti-tank missiles and Dragunov sniper rifles to the Ukrainian National Army, specifically to create a greater hostile response if the Russians invade, which the Obama National Security Council refused to do because it was too provocative. So that's the reality of the Trump era. But go back to Obama, what happened with the Crimea referendum and the start of the war in Donbass, and now the possibility here. You have a Democrat president, Russia gets aggressive in Ukraine. Another Democrat president, Russia gets aggressive in Ukraine. You can't ignore these things. So that's to your question, Clay. You're asking it because you can see it too. It's clearly there. On the first part of this, what does Putin get? There's the nuts and bolts of, will there be some kind of concessions? How does this deal with NATO membership, Nord Stream 2 pipeline issues, future pipeline issues? You know, there's a lot of how Russia could try to view this as an opportunity to expand its influence and essentially get concessions through diplomatic. By the way, that is the hope right now.
Yes.
I don't think that's what's really going on here, but that would be, for a lot of reasons, the best possible scenario, I think. But then if you get into, well, what else could he be gaining from this if he were to go in? Now you're looking at more Russia, irredentism, Russia wanting the lost land, so to speak, of the Soviet Union, Russia thinking that it needs to be the grand player on the world stage in this region, a leader in Eurasia, uniting the Russian-speaking peoples. You get, Clay, more into almost Russian national and spiritual narrative. Now, whether the Russian people feel or agree with that or not, that's the way Putin frames it. Essentially, for Putin, this is about strategic depth if he goes in and reestablishing, as horrific as this is to say and sound, in Putin's mind, I think it's meant to be reestablishing Russian greatness in the region. And I know you hear that, you say, by invading a friendly neighboring country? Yes, that's his mindset.
Well, and what, you know whose mindset that sounds like? It sounds like Germany in World War II. Because the historical relevance there is Germany got its ass kicked in World War I, and the German people were humiliated. And Hitler rose to power on the idea of, I'm going to restore German excellence. Right? I'm going to bring back that dominance that we used to have. And that was the undergirding appeal of Hitler's rise. And certainly you could analogize the collapse of Russia under Gorbachev, Yeltsin, eventually Putin coming to power as the Russian equivalent of World War I, and now going into Crimea and going into Ukraine is an element of that, right? It's about establishing Russian nationalistic dominance and making the people of Russia feel good about Mother Russia again in a way that they have not since they were humiliated on the global stage with the collapse of the Cold War.
That's one thing, Clay. That's a critical point. That's one thing that people that I know who are Russian and I've spoken with over the years about the situation of Russia, not just in, of course, the Trump collusion lies around the election, but more generally about what does Putin want is the question. A lot of people. There's been some fascinating reporting on how this is a guy who wakes up every day and, with his Cheerios, so to speak, whatever the Russian equivalent is, he is reading the newspapers of the common man. He tries to have a very good, he reads the kind of populist news, so to speak, in Russia. He tries to have an understanding of what the general opinion within his country may be. In the West, we're always focused on human rights and democracy activists like Navalny, and with good reason. But Putin actually presided over the creation of a Russian middle class. People forget this. He does actually have support within his own country. We view him as almost like a comic book villain, the way we look at Kim Jong-un or we look at the Ayatollahs. But in Russia, there is real support for him, not just from within the institutions of power, but from some of the common men on the street. So we may be misreading at some level the Russian people's appetite for this military intervention. You know what I mean? This is a part of it that people don't think about very much because it doesn't get reported here. So by the way, I'm putting out, now that we're looking at this, I'm putting out feelers to my people. I'm reaching out to former Intel people. We got to get the folks that can bring us. Hopefully Nolan Peterson will join us tomorrow. We need ground truth, and we need people that are granular. I was granular on Iraq. I was granular on Afghanistan back in the day. We need people that are granular on Ukraine because I think this is about to pop off.
And it may be happening tomorrow while we're live on the air, maybe happening Wednesday. You never actually know. This is going to be a tinderbox type moment.